Okay, welcome back. Non-stop. Never seen anything like it. It just goes and goes. I'm getting reports about next year. What's in the plan, and the plan is not good. We're looking at. I don't want to go into it because people will. He's spreading rumors and all that. It's not what I do. But things are going to get to be worse. That's all I can tell you. I'm sorry to say it. I would urge all of you just to set aside a few moments and plan how you are going to spend Christmas. This may be the last Christmas, the type of which we have grown up with and known, at least in terms of the general idea of Christmas. This may be it. So make your plans, figure out who you want to be around, and don't worry about spending a lot of money. Christmas is a special time. It's not dollars and cents. As Stan Freberg did in his wonderful musical parody, Christmas comes but once a year, so you better get rich. Anyway, that's not the idea. That was called a green Christmas. That was from the 1950s. He could see where it was going. We'll do something different this first hour. We like to think that because we're in the moment and there's so much concern, trepidation, angst, that we're the only game in town, and we lose the perspective that this planet is 4.5 billion years old. It's not new. It's been around. We, as hominids, have been on this planet for a long time. Many different civilizations and epochs of human inhabitation and growth and building have come and gone over the countless millennia. So it's a good idea to have some perspective once in a while. Doesn't mean we withdraw from today's challenges. And one last thing, let me just remind you, and I don't think I need to because you are the best. You understand. I don't tell anyone how to vote. I don't tell anyone how to think. I just ask them to engage in the process of thinking and voting if they feel like it. Your vote is not for a personality. It's for the constitutional republic, or what's left of it, or communism, Bolshevism, Zionism, Marxism, Leninism, progressivism, socialism, liberalism. You vote left, that's what you get. You vote right, we'll try to hold on to what we have remaining as a constitutional republic. That's your choice. Forget Trump, forget the creeper, and I know it's impossible to forget his son. This guy is sub-animal dirt. And the old man is virtually the same. They've just spent 47 years hiding his outrageous behaviors in terms of criminally fostering his own bankroll, shall we say. Okay, you get the idea. Back with us is Frank Joseph tonight. We're going to look at something fascinating. I think a lot of you are fairly familiar with the Nazca lines in Peru. There's been a new discovery there, a new icon, as it were, has been found, and there are other things to report about, too. You want to think about who did all this 2,000 years ago, who made all these pictograms in very arid terrain that can only be seen from above, and who are they making them for? Obviously, they were being routinely visited. There's no question. They were being made for viewing from above. Hello, Frank, and welcome back. It's pretty crazy out there, my friend.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come back. This is a difficult time for everyone, as you pointed out, and I don't want to be evasive on that. But it's good, I think, to put ourselves into the perspective of sometimes greater things, that our lives seem to be revolving around this election and so forth, and that's the biggest thing going on. Well, actually, it's incredibly teeny. It's hardly more than a passing incident compared to some of the great things in the past that have happened, and some of the recognition of great things now that I wanted to share with you and our listeners, because this is not going to be just a rehash of the Nazca lines, which probably most of our listeners are at least fundamentally familiar with. There's been a couple of really kind of mind-blowing discoveries associated with this, and I was really anxious to discuss it.
Go to guests and go to guests and click on guests and open the page and look for Frank Joseph at the top, and we'll be talking about one of the items that you'll see under his name there. Go ahead.
Well, for those of our listeners not entirely familiar with this, the Nazca lines are in coastal Peru. They're in the most arid place on Earth. It has the least rainfall of any place on Earth. That's just the beginning of this global uniqueness associated with this site. And that's what's preserved these lines, these drawings, so spectacularly over time, because there's virtually no rainfall there.
No erosion,
No, and not only that, but there's hardly ever any wind. You have very low wind at all. And then the third environmental factor is that it stays the same temperature year-round, about 77 degrees. It doesn't fluctuate hardly more than 70. So here you have a place that the temperature never varies from 77 degrees, has virtually no wind, and is the driest place, most arid spot in the world. So it's a very, whoever did these drawings, and I don't pretend to know who did, I can speculate, but don't know, they obviously went there knowing what they were doing. This was the perfect place to create the world's largest art gallery. That's exactly what it is. There is nothing literally on Earth that is as huge as this collection of geometric designs, biomorphs. A biomorph is a design which represents a specific animal or plant. And the lines themselves, these dead straight lines, have mystified people for a very long time. Well, actually not that long, because they've only been discovered since 1940. Until 1940, these lines were completely unknown to the native people that were there. By 1940, of course, Peru was a completely civilized place. There were no more wilderness to be discovered, and yet nobody saw these
80
lines.
80 years ago, that's it.
That's it,
all, 80 years ago.
And they were only found by accident by a man from New York. His name was Cossack, who was flying over the Peruvian desert. And there weren't even many planes in Peru in 1940, except for American military planes. That's about all. And they stayed nowhere near over the desert. He flew over the desert, and he looked down, and he was astounded to see these representations of various animals and plants. And that's when it all started. And ever since then, people have been trying to figure out, what are we looking at? What is this? And these structures, as you can call them, they have a combined length, if you put all the lines together, of almost 1,000 miles. That's how much work has gone into this thing. And they cover an area of about 20 square miles. The main concentration of these designs is in a 6 by 2 mile rectangle. They've been confined within that type of an area. They're not spread all over Peru, by no means. They are only confined within this rectangle, this 6 by 2 miles. The area encompassing the lines altogether is much larger. That's 170 square miles. What I mean by that is there's two fundamental groups down at Nazca. One of them are these representations that you can pretty well understand, geometric designs or animals, and then the others are completely different. They are dead straight lines that go across the Peruvian desert. They don't even know for how many miles, because sometimes they seem to disappear, but at least dozens, probably hundreds of miles, dead straight surveyed. They go over mountains, they go over boulders, they go through the remains of forests, and they don't seem to go any place in particular. They don't connect with anything. Some of them phase out. The ones that are the biggest are the best preserved. They're in like mint condition. And no one's been able to associate any kind of astronomical association with many of them. There's been some astronomical association with some of these lines, but those alignments might be by chance. So nobody really knows.
Good. Yeah.
We don't know. But anyway, this is kind of familiar with people, our listeners. But one thing that's really outstanding, this has been known for a long time, but most people aren't aware of this. The Nazca lines, among their bioglyphs, is a spider. And this spider is 154 feet in length. It's the largest representation of a spider on Earth. What's bizarre about this spider, it seems anatomically correct, except one of its legs extends away from its body, twice the length of its body, and has a kind of a hook on the end of its leg. So people thought, is that a mistake? Is that an artistic convention? There's no spider in the world looks like that. Why did they make a representation of a spider like that? That was a mystery until 1991. Because in 1991...
let me say something real quick.
Go ahead. Yeah.
For everyone out there on keyboard, just type in Nazca, Nazca, Nazca spider. And you'll see pictures of exactly what Frank is talking about. Nazca spider. Yeah. So the Nazca spider is 154 feet long. It's the largest representation of a spider on Earth. No one knew why it was represented like this with this greatly extended leg and the hook on the end until 1991, when an American biologist working not in Peru, but on the other side of the Andes Mountains in the Brazilian rainforest, found the smallest known spider so far. And the name of that spider is called Ricinusleae. R-I-C, if I remember this, R-I-C-I-N-U-L-E-I. You can look this up as well. You can just go to Wikipedia or any place. And this little spider has an extended leg and a little hook on its end, precisely like the spider portrayed in the Nazca lines, which is literally a world away, even though it's in the same continent, because the little spider is in the Brazilian rainforest, and the giant spider on the Nazca lines, that's in the Peruvian desert, hundreds of miles, through very difficult miles, of course, over the Andes. What's remarkable about this little spider is that it uses its long leg it extends its leg in the morning, and that little hook on the end, well, that's its sex organ, but it's also used to collect dew. And the dew forms on the long leg of the little spider, and it drinks from the dew. Now, that spider that's found is microscopic, or at least you need a very powerful magnifying glass. It's that small. Really? It's that tiny. It is the
smallest known spider so far.
Like smaller than a grain of rice. It's tiny.
Oh, much smaller. Yeah. Much smaller.
Wow.
And probably is the smallest spider in the world that's ever lived. So, two questions. First of all, why would the ancient people in Peru portray this spider, which has never existed in Peru, cannot exist in Peru? It needs to live in a very moist environment in order to survive. Why would they portray that animal in the desert? And number two, how could they have known about it? They didn't have they had no microscope, supposedly, no magnifying glasses, yet they knew about this spider. The Nazca lines, according to mainstream archaeologists, were made about between 200 BC and maybe 500 AD. That admittedly is real guesswork. Let me tell you, real guesswork. I was down with the Nazca lines. I stayed there for some time. I learned as much as I could. And I learned when you really go to these places and then you read about them in official versions, they don't always jive with what you've really seen, and that certainly is in regards to this little spider. We do know the answer why they probably portrayed this animal in the Nazca Desert, and this kind of helps to tell us really how old those drawings might be, and that is the drawings are almost all of them that are portraying animals or plants related to the sea or to water. There are frigate birds. A frigate bird is a bird that, in common in Peru, still it dives into the water. It fills its gullet sac with water. Whales. One was thought to be a tree. It's now understood that it is representing seaweed. There's a fox portrayed that doesn't seem to be associated with water until you learn that one of the local legends about the fox includes the Great Flood or the Great Deluge that they talked about. So these creatures that are portrayed apparently represent water deities, including this little spider, because the little spider, that's how it drank. That's how it drinks, is off of its extended leg when it gets moisture on, and it drinks that way. Now, that area of the world that is now all desert was not always desert. We know geologists know for a fact that the Peruvian desert, going back 5,000 to 10,000 years ago now, long before 200 BC, but more like 5,000 or 10,000 years BC, was a lush forest, swampy, wonderful place to live on the coast itself. A very rich area, great place for a civilization. And then the climate began to change down there over time, rather rapidly, actually, in geologic terms. And the desert began to encroach in what is now coastal Peru. And that took place, that desertification took place rapidly from about 3,000 BC to about 2,000 BC. That's very fast geologically, but in fact it did happen. So you have a people down there making these drawings, appealing to their water deities or whatever, because they were going through a crisis. And that crisis was the loss of their nurturing environment, their fertile environment, to the encroachment of the desert. And if you believe that, and that's a logical belief, that dates those drawings down there, not to 200 BC, but to about maybe 5,000 or more years ago, maybe even going back 10,000 years. A long time ago. So those drawings, one of the lies that they still perpetuate about the Nazca lines, and you can go on Wikipedia and see this, they'll say, well, these lines, these things, they're hard to see from the ground, but there are these foothills not so far behind. You can climb up there and you can see it all. No, you can't. I went down to Nazca. You can stand on and there are no foothills close to these things. Not close enough to see them. They're many miles away. You stand there and you look at where these lines are, you see nothing. Nothing. It just looks like regular environment. You have to be in an airplane that's a good 1,000 feet in the air. And that's what you do. They encourage you to rent an aircraft there, and they have rides. They'll fly you over the Nazca lines. And we went up. We really only saw them properly, I'd say, between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. If you're down at 500 feet, they still spread out. To see them properly, you've got to be in an aircraft at least 1,500 feet, ideally 2,000 or more feet. Mm-hmm. So this is not, you can see them from the ground. No, you can't. It's impossible. These Nazca lines are maybe made by two different people. One group that I mentioned with these biomorphs, that might represent this one group that was struggling with water. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay. I just got some interference here. I just didn't know if it was coming through. Then the other group, I say, are these lines. They've really mystified investigators over time. What do these lines signify? They are surveyed with terrific precision over the course of many miles. I could say possibly hundreds of miles, and various environments. What could they possibly mean? Mm-hmm. There was a fellow who still has these wonderful YouTubes. He deals primarily, he's a surveyor. And if I remember his name correctly, yes, his name is Charles Foley. He's an American surveyor himself. And some of his videos, are, I guess all of them really, they deal with ancient American mound sites, and he likes to see if there's any kind of spatial relationship between these ancient mounds. And he'd heard about Nazca, of course everybody else had too as well, and he tried a little experiment. He went on to Google Earth, and what he did is he was able to trace the major lines at Nazca. These are the really big, long, straight ones that are in great shape. There are others that are in not such good shape and can't quite tell. By the way, there are, parenthetically here, there are about 600 now found of these biomorphs, about 600 animals and plants represented, and unknown thousands of these lines. Unknown thousands.
Right. What strikes me, and it's kind of a parallel, it's not exact, but there's a similarity in these mystery drawings that are designed to be seen from above with the current-day crop circles. Think about it. It's the same idea, but the technology seems to be just as exact, precise, but they're using a different medium. They're not using just rocks in the ground that expose a lighter soil underneath. But it's an interesting idea. Hold on a minute. We'll be right back with Frank as we continue. And we are talking about new developments at Nazca. This is interesting. How do you look at the two, crop circles and the Nazca lines?
I think that's a very interesting parallel. And I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think I've given that too much thought.
What if people didn't make these? Like they don't make the crop circles.
These? Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let me give you an idea how maybe people didn't make these beautiful drawings, these precise drawings. You know, some of these biomorphs down there in Peru, they're over 2,000 feet long. There's a condor there that's like, I think, 21 or 2,200 feet wingspread. Now, that's all made with one continuous line. It's called unicursal.
Can't do it from the ground.
One continuous line. Well, maybe these people were pretty technologically advanced, but boy, they'd have to be really advanced to do so. And that's what all of these are. They're made with. In other words, unicursal means, like you say, you put your finger in the sand and you make a drawing. And you keep that finger in the sand completely to make that one drawing. And if it makes one mistake, it'll show up like forever. The way that these drawings appear is because the ground below is this white, yellow, sand-like texture. Yes. And then there's got this darker, like desert varnish over the top. If you put your finger into it and draw a line, you'll see that the dark cover is now interrupted by this yellowish-white line. So if you put your finger, like, say, in the sand, you want to make a drawing, you make no mistakes, you make this beautiful spider or condor or whatever. The spider itself is one of the smaller ones, 154 feet long, and you go and you make it perfectly with that one continuous motion. Well, that's pretty outstanding. But as far as the parallel between the two, I don't know, but I think it's something that is worth considering.
Thank you. I agree. Well, it could have been made from above. I mean, think about it. Not all
absolutely.
of them. I mean, here's a ship up there. Okay, they've got a beam of a directed energy weapon beam or directed energy beam, and they set it so it'll just turn the soil over for about 6 inches deep, and they just put a template into we'll call it a computer for fun, push a button, and boom, the line is made. The figure is made.
It just occurred to me that there might be more of a parallel than I realized. I have not seen, I've seen a lot of crop circles on YouTube and so on the Internet. As I recall, a lot of them do seem to be unicursal. They seem to be formed by one continuous line.
Yeah.
Not all of them. I don't know. I'd have to go back and check, but maybe that's a commonality. Well, to get back what I was about to mention, I did mention Charles Foley, who is he is a surveyor, and he came out with a YouTube that was critically examined for quite a few years. Until now, it's generally understood that doing his research, he's correct. The YouTube he came out with was in 2014. And I did send it to you, as a matter of fact. You can learn. Well, anyway, what he discovered, what he did, very simple experiment. Anybody can do this. You can replicate this yourself. You go onto Google Earth or a MapQuest. And what he did is he took all of the major lines at Nazca, not the biomorphs, just the linear lines that seem to go for miles and then just stop or vanish. And he took those lines and he extrapolated them. He plotted them around the Earth just to see what would happen. So he extended these.
Oh, what an interesting man. Very smart.
That's an interesting idea. But it's a simple idea. But and if you want to check this out, and people have checked this out in the last 6 years, they've replicated his findings over and over again. And now the general consensus is, even amongst his critics, he did it right. And so what he did is just to see what would happen, he plotted these lines out from Nazca, only from Nazca, around the globe to see what would happen. They all, of course, converge. They begin their convergence at Nazca. And he plotted them out. They go around the Earth, and they begin to get kind of regular. You can see in this recreation that he has from Google Earth that they seem pretty regular. That's kind of interesting in itself, but it's no big deal. But then they converge again on the other side of the world. They all converge exactly the way they converged at the beginning at Nazca. And where they converge is Angkor Wat, Cambodia.
Oh, no.
That is, it's
no
mind-blowing.
Coincidence.
No, it's not a coincidence. Let me tell you why it's not a coincidence. Because I did this on my own. I didn't see this, that he did it, but I checked. I couldn't believe it at first either. But I checked on these distances involved. They're very simple math. And it turns out that the distance from Nazca to Angkor Wat is 12,302 miles. That is precisely halfway around the globe. Midpoint. Now, that's not an easy thing to do because our world, the Earth, is not a perfect sphere by any means. It has an equatorial bulge. It's more akin to an egg, not maybe that extreme, but we're more oblate than spherical. And whoever plotted, there's no doubt that this happened deliberately. Someone arranged these two major, huge sites to be in a relationship, a global relationship to each other, and they took in the equatorial bulge because the mean circumference of the Earth is 24,901 miles. If you just do it straight around, it wouldn't work. But if you take into account the equatorial bulge, which is the real deal, the distance between Nazca and Angkor Wat is spot on. It converges at Nazca, and it converges at Angkor Wat. Now, what is Angkor Wat? Most of our listeners maybe have heard that name. They're not quite familiar with it. And I admit that I wasn't that familiar with it until I investigated it. The name Angkor Wat means island temple. Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's called Island Temple is that it is the world's largest religious complex and structures of all time. People think maybe the Vatican is big. Well, Angkor Wat is bigger than 3 times the size of Vatican City. It is if you had 300 football fields, that might cover it. It has 10 million square feet. Can you imagine? That's impossible. An ultra-conservative minimum of 10,400,000 tons of sandstone went into building this place, not including the foundation stones. It is surrounded by the world's largest moat ever made. It is 1.3 kilometers from north to south and 1.5 kilometers from east to west. It has a perimeter of 5.5 kilometers. It dwarfs even the Great Pyramid, and yet it's not as well known. But yet this is the place where all the Nazca lines reconverge on the other side of the world.
This really an ingenious idea to trace them and to find that out. Just remarkable.
It is. And Angkor Wat, the dates given to us by archaeologists on both of these sites, Angkor Wat in Cambodia and the Nazca Lines in Peru, are obviously not realistic. Angkor Wat, they say, that goes back maybe to the 12th century. It could be 900 years old. If you look at the society that occupied Angkor Wat in the 12th century, these were people that came at much later after it had been made. The people that lived in Angkor Wat in the 12th century did not have the maritime capabilities of voyaging all the way to South America. Also, by that time, in the 12th century, the Nazca Lines had been abandoned for many hundreds of years. According to the archaeologists, the last Nazca Lines were made about maybe 500 A.D., that's all. So 700 years later, people from Angkor Wat came to Peru. Does not seem to be the case. So these dates are all wrong. I would throw them all out. I think that archaeology needs to go back and start all over again when it comes to dating these places. But beyond that, that's the least important thing. What is true is that these two sites are related in terms of the Earth, that they define the precise halfway point around the world, and they were made by people that we cannot imagine, probably a very long time ago. And it's interesting, isn't it? Here we have the world's largest art gallery in South America, and then will those lines reconverge? We have the world's largest religious center. What are they trying to tell us? What was going on? It certainly promotes more and prompts more questions than answers. But nonetheless, this is true. I'm giving you the facts on this. This is not interpretation. This is not theory or hypothesis. This is real. It actually exists. And the reason I like to talk about it now is because it shows that our history needs to be completely revised. There were great things going on a long time ago, and we're only just beginning to get a glimpse of it.
You couldn't be more correct. We don't know anything about our ancient past. You have spent a career finding out what really happened on this planet to us and to others and other forms of life and animals. You have uncovered such astonishing things of our past. You remind me of a prodigious Michael Cremo, whose book, The Hidden History of the Human Race, is a must read, as are all of Frank Joseph's books. They tell us what really happened. We don't seem to have a right to know, according to the controlling elite, what really went on this planet before. And I mean way back. We've got, again, 4.5 billion years. Let's just slash off the first billion years to let the planet settle down. 3.5 billion years of life-supporting environmental configuration here, to one degree or another. And the ancient relics that Michael Cremo and you have dug up are more than suggestive of far advanced civilizations than we know about. Look at Mars. It's the same thing. Mars is a planet covered with wreckage. Something blew the hell out of an enormously advanced civilization up there. Same thing here. We've lost it many times. But you're to be commended most highly for your work.
Well, that's very kind of you, and I feel quite flattered to be compared with Michael Cremo. He's been someone that I've really admired very greatly. But, I have to tell you, Jeff, that the more I learn about these things, the more I feel there is to learn, and that the picture is much bigger than I ever imagined. Like this moat, for example, at Angkor Wat, just the moat alone, it varies to a depth of between 12 and 25 feet, but it's totally surrounded by tiers of stone steps that descend into the water.
We're talking about guys with wooden shovels? Come on.
And it has, like I said, it has a perimeter of 5.5 kilometers. It's always filled with water. And the reason why, and people can never understand until fairly recent, why has the water never evaporated from this place? There's no indication that it has ever evaporated. Well, it turns out that they only learned, I think, maybe about 5 years ago, that this moat, the largest moat in the world, which is at Angkor Wat, is part of a drainage system that collects water from all over Angkor Wat and drains into the moat. Not only that, but it is interconnected with a vast irrigation system of reservoirs, channels, canals, tanks, ponds, and that keeps the water going. It's just the level of genius involved in this. The engineering genius is something that we can't grasp. It's exactly as you say. It is impossible for, I don't care if you had 1 million men out there with chisels and stone hammers and antler shovels to build something like this. It's completely impossible. You know what the archaeologists say? That Angkor Wat was built in 37 years, probably with 1 million men. Oh, yeah? Well, you know what that means? That if you took all of the sandstone that we know that's gone into Angkor Wat,
they're so full of garbage.
That means that they were moving, the people there were moving a ton of stone block every minute, every 60 seconds. You'd have to do that in order to do this in 37 years.
Right.
You'd have to raise the stone, cut the stone, transport the stone, lift it, and fit it into position so beautifully and perfectly that you would have only 60 seconds to do all that. I mean, just little things like that show how off base mainstream archaeologists
just try this on. How about the idea that visitors, our friends, were up in ships above the Nazca Plains and using technology to make these drawings, pictograms. And they also just happen to have the technology to make these canals that you're talking about, these moats. And they did the same thing from above. They
the stone that was built in Angkor Wat, they've been able to trace all sandstone. They know which quarry it came from. You know where the quarries were located? 50 miles away on top of a mountain. How was it possible for a pre-industrial people to have moved over 10 million tons of stone from the top of a mountain? You know, the only conclusion that I can come to on all this is that both of these sites were not built by human beings. I don't believe that human beings then, and maybe not even now, had the capability. And the reason why I believe them is not because of the terrific construction challenges involved in either Nazca or Angkor Wat. The thing that is a tip-off, I think, is why they were placed where they were. Exactly halfway around the world. What kind of an ancient civilization had the technology to be able to figure that out? I think that these places were made by extraterrestrials. Angkor Wat itself resembles no other temple like itself in the whole world. Nothing looks like it at all.
Nothing
throughout Cambodia, through all of Asia.
No similar architecture. No.
None. Not at all. And Nazca, you pointed out, it kind of resembles or suggests the crop circle structures. I wouldn't rule that out. I really am so completely bowled over, who wouldn't be, by the vast, colossal magnitude of these two sites. I don't believe they were made by human beings. I think that they were made by another intelligence for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know what their purposes were. But I believe that that's the only logical conclusion that I think one can draw from this.
I concur. Oh, yeah. No, this planet has been the venue of countless civilizations, extraordinary accomplishments, and in many cases, technology was the downfall of the people. And where they got the technology, I don't know, probably given to them, some of it was invented, certainly on their own. Read Edgar Cayce's book. It's a little book, 120 pages or something. Edgar Cayce on Atlantis. They took all references to Atlantis from Edgar Cayce's sessions. What was it, 45,000 sessions or something? I can't remember. But just to read that book gives you so many new ideas. And look at what's going on now. What was it that Cayce in one of his trance readings said that this is in the 30s, that the Atlanteans were combining genetically men and beast.
Yeah,
He said
imagine
that.
someone, an uneducated man like Edgar Casey, who I don't think he even finished grammar school, and yet he was saying things that in his time made absolutely no sense that we can only understand now. He called them the things. He said that the Atlanteans were manipulating genes in order to create, kind of like a slave race. They were human or humanoid, and they were modified in such a way that they were brutes, but were physically able to do a lot of the work. So don't get yourself vaccinated these days. I guess maybe that's what that means. I don't know.
I feel really sorry because a lot of people are going to be frightened into vaccination. I'm going to use
that's the whole idea, isn't it?
I will use a term now that is not being used by anyone else, not yet. I'm going to call it COVID-21.
Oh.
No one else has used that, and if I'm correct, COVID-21 is coming.
Wow.
So just remember that, everyone, and you heard it here first. So we'll see.
Well, you know, what you said at the beginning of the program, I think, was very timely and appropriate, and I just underscore every word you said. But I'm not quite as depressed about all this. I think that if Trump becomes president again or stays president, that would be, the good part of that would be his reelection would thoroughly would dismantle the entire news media, because the news media has been fanatically focused on the political destruction of this man 24/7 for the last 4 years. And if he wins, they're finished. Boy, that's one of the greatest things we could have ever hoped for, that the news media's credibility would be complete. And they did it to themselves. Nobody shut them down. They shut themselves down. They will have as much credibility comparably as Saturday Night Live, which used to be a good show 40 years ago and which now nobody watches anymore because it's rotten. It doesn't mean anything. I don't even know why it's on the air.
I don't either.
That's the best thing about Trump being reelected. It would mean that the news media is finished with credit. Nobody will believe it ever again. They tried their best to destroy this man. They didn't. And if Biden wins, well, maybe that's a good thing, too. Because if he wins, that means that the majority of American people, the real American people, will see that the system is hopelessly broken. And they're going to have to figure something else out. They're not going to be able to go through normal channels, and maybe that's what it takes.
No, I agree. We have all of these Bolshevik communists ready to spring into action right after the so-called election. If Trump wins, it's already it's already done. Believe me, the decision was made long ago. If Trump is the winner, and I believe he will be, they'll use that to justify in their own distorted, malignant, malevolent brains the further destruction and burning of even more cities, buildings, towns, shops, killing of people, killing of cops. Trump stole the election. Trump's the fraud. It's the Republicans. They want that. They need that to trigger what's going to happen. That's another reason I think Trump he'll be reinstated.
Well, kind of speculation at this point, I guess.
It's all speculation at this point. Yeah, but it makes sense. They want a reason to go berserk, and it's already planned. The fires here that burned down over 3,000 homes and hundreds of businesses were not
and nobody got
natural.
Arrested for it, as far as I know. No one got arrested.
There
no
were
one interfered.
Over a dozen separate fires set that caused the big blaze called the Alameda Fire here. Mm-hmm. All Antifa, BLM, arson at work. Over a dozen fires were set here. That came from an inside source.
Well, I cannot imagine what the extraterrestrials must be thinking. They certainly are part of an advanced civilization, a sophisticated civilization. They look down on us, and I can't imagine how they must regard. I think their last attempt the most recent attempt to help us out was that coronavirus true vaccine that they showed us in that
was
crop
a brilliant
circle.
thing you presented here. Yeah.
Well, we tried, didn't we? We both of us
sure
tried,
did.
and others tried to get this out. But the powers that be don't want it out because they need people panicked. They need people to be afraid, wear the little masks, and be scared all the time. That's the best way to manipulate people, is when they're scared to death. And so they don't want to release that stuff. So. But we tried. We did our best.
I agree. That's all we can do.